Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, one of the civic partners for our show. My guest today is Carlene Bermann. Carlene is the executive director of the St. Lawrence County Center for History and Culture. And many people know it as the County Museum or the St. Lawrence County Historical Association, which was its old name. Carlene, welcome back to North Country Matters. You're here to talk to us today about the process you went through to research and restore the garden at the Silas Wright House. So, where did the idea for restoring the garden come from?
Yes, thank you, Donna. It's so nice to be back on the show. So, the idea for the garden was something that I'd been mulling over for a while in my first year here, and it was sort of inspired from necessity. There was a bit of deferred maintenance on our property. For many years, we had the generosity of the Canton Garden Club. They were very active in doing a lot of the work on our grounds. And as the years have passed, that club has become less active and unfortunately just sort of inactive at this point and doesn't have many members. Um, so we knew there was a need to do something new to make sure that our property was maintained, and we saw it as a nice opportunity to not just, find a way to cut the grass and take down some trees that were in need of, taking down, but to make it into a larger project that could also be educational. So, I had attended a few conferences during COVID that talked a lot about the importance of using your whole property to its fullest and taking advantage of spaces where people could be safely distanced outside. So I thought it was a nice opportunity to really think about our grounds in a new way and incorporate them into the interpretation that we do in the house.
That makes a lot of sense. So, how old is the house and how far back did you want to go in working on the garden? Did you want to represent a specific era or have a more general idea of a period garden through the decades?
So the original house was built by Moses Whitcomb it was a two-room cottage built between 1833 and 1834. Over the next decade, there were a lot of additions made to the house, including the bedrooms on the second floor, the kitchen area, and a lot of other rooms. And then there were later additions put on the house as well. So, because the house had been actively lived in and used from the 1830s until, well, basically today, but until becoming a museum in the 1970s, we felt like we had the liberty to take a wide interpretive scope. So we really are focusing more on the 1830s to 60s time period for our interpretation. So think Georgian and Victorian style with the gardens. But we're not really, it's a loose interpretation because we don't actually have any documentation of things that were grown. Most of the old pictures that we see show some bushes in front of the house, a few trees, and some grass, but grass wasn't actually common in the 1830s. Um, so we have sort of what we're going for is a sort of an amalgamation of what gardens at the time period may have looked like in this area and the kinds of plants that would have been grown. So, medicinal, culinary, dye plants from that time period that were common and that would have been grown in this region and to some extent are still grown. We do know that Silas Wright, we've seen in letters documentation that he had a small apple orchard and grew vegetables. Those probably would have been in the back of the property in land that we no longer have. So because we're at about an acre now, it's a much smaller space we have to work with. So we're kind of compacting a lot into a small space and really thinking of it more as a representative, one or two examples of each plants rather than trying to do, recreate an entire orchard or a whole, we just don't have the property to be able to do a big multi-acre, gardens that you can walk through like a lot of historic houses would have had.
Sure. So really, you kind of did a forensic garden research process, didn't you? So what resources? I mean, you've talked about his letters, but there must be a lot of other kinds of resources that you have, like diaries in Canton from the time and things like that, where people maybe were talking about what they were growing, and that must have helped to inform you as you started to put together your garden plan.
We do have, information, agricultural records from local farms historically. We also are very lucky to still have so many active farms in this area where we can, I go to the farmers market regularly. I've talked to farmers, a lot of things, the climate, as we know, is changing, but a lot of the things we grow now are things that people would have grown 150 years ago, like apples, for example. So, to some extent, we can, say in good confidence, like, this is a thing that we know was grown then and is still grown now. Also, a lot of books. There's a lot of books that have been written about Victorian gardens. I have some of them here in the museum, either my personal collection or things in our collection. Things like we have a historic seed catalog, which is really cool. That's from the 1860s, and it shows the types of things that people could have ordered for their homes to grow for food, which is really neat. I'm also drawing from there's websites, my experience working with other organizations on tours. For example, Hyde Hall near Cooperstown, New York. We did a similar project. We actually created a walking tour of that historic property, which included apple orchards and some culinary gardens. Um, and also other local properties that are close and would have a similar growing, climate in the same region. One example is the Kent Delord Historic House in Plattsburgh. They've actually done an amazing job recreating the historic gardens there, which date to about the 1840s and 50s. So they have a beautiful front yard, which is landscape with stone and some really nice plants all around that they've done in a very small space. So I spoke with their director, and it's a really great example of the kind of thing we are aiming for on a slightly different scale on our property.
You mentioned an old seed catalog. There's a lot of interest in heirloom seeds nowadays, and a lot of companies are actually providing those. So, for anybody who's interested in doing a period garden, and lots of us do have older homes that have been around for decades and in some cases nearly centuries, that's another great source, isn't it?
It is. And, we're certainly not inventing the wheel here. A lot of historic house museums have done amazing research and recreated some of those historic gardens that they either had the documentation from on their site or that they had things like seed catalogs, letters, order forms that they could use for that reference. And we had those materials at Hyde Hall that we referred to. We had some orders that had actually been placed for the trees on the property and some of the vegetable starts and things. And that's a really great, there's nothing like those kinds of primary source records to guide you in this kind of research.
You mentioned trees. I'm reminded that I live just off of Elm Street, and of course there are no elm trees anymore in
Mhm.
Potsdam. So a lot of changes have happened over the years. Sometimes you can't actually plant what was there, can you? Because of either climate change or uh, diseases and things.
Exactly. And that's a really great point. So not only do some of the things that grew here, 150 plus years ago not grow here so well anymore, but things like, blights that have taken away elms and new things that we are contending with now, different diseases and things that climate has affected, and of course throughout time, what is popular, the plants that people grow changes as well. So a lot of the things that people were growing in the area as ornamental plants in particular in this time period are just not available anymore. They were things, that came over from Europe or from Asia. Some of them were naturalized in this area. Some of them are now considered pretty invasive in this area, but weren't at the time period because there weren't that many of them. So, it's really it's basically impossible to recreate something 100%, even if you have the documentation. So to that end, we're also taking a little bit of creative license. We're not trying to recreate any specific thing, but we're kind of giving the essence not only of the time period, but using it as an opportunity to educate about people's relationships with plants in many different ways, and not just, European settlers who lived here, but the three trees we are actually planning on replanting in the front yard are going to be serviceberry trees, which were given to us very generously by SUNY Potsdam. They had some left from a program they did where they actually planted some of those trees because they're a very significant tree to the indigenous people here. They were used for food, they were used for medicine, and they're a fairly small ornamental tree. So we have three different serviceberry varieties we were planting, which we can say with pretty much confidence would not have been grown at the Silas Wright House, but we do know that those trees were in this area for a long time and were very important to indigenous populations. So we're also trying to bring in some of that history and kind of take a wide scope of what all different people in this area may have grown, used, considered significant.
That's really interesting. And you mentioned the serviceberry trees. So once you planned out the garden, you had to collect the plants and get them on the site. In some cases like that, they are donated plants. What did the process involve about actually collecting plants? I know you put out kind of a general call, didn't you, for people to volunteer? They might have had things that they could offer you.
We did, and part of the sort of early, advertising of this project was, we're calling it a fundraiser. We were originally thinking we would need a lot of money to purchase a lot of these materials. We have purchased plants from mostly local nurseries, but we've also had a lot of very generous donors in the community. And our building and grounds person, Sarah Lynch, has actually done an amazing job. She lives in Potsdam and has a lot of connections all around the area and has reached out to a lot of people. People have offered to donate things from their own gardens. Things came from the Potsdam Food Co-op. Things kind of came from all over, which was not something we originally anticipated with the project, but has actually been a really amazing aspect that we're so happy about because it makes our garden even more unique, and it seems very appropriate to actually recreate a garden from things that came from all over the county. And some of these, like one is from one of our volunteers who is in her 90s and has been growing things. The plants are historic in their own right now because she's been cultivating her gardens for 40 years and her property itself was an old dairy farm. So to pull these plants that were, they're well established in the area, they're adapted to the climate now. Some of them have come from farms or properties that have been here for decades. We just think that's a really cool aspect of, we're sort of recreating a garden out of all of the other gardens in the area.
That reminds me, I have several rhubarb plants on my in my yard, and they were given to me by somebody who had found an old rhubarb patch on a property that he had bought several decades ago. So these rhubarb plants they could be 100 years old. They really very easily could be 100 years old because some of these old farms have just continued to keep these crops going, haven't they?
They have. And like I said, we've been very lucky to, since I'm, still fairly new to this area, I don't know a lot of people, but talking to people who recommend someone else to us who has been growing for a long time. And that's how we've had very generous, donors from both businesses and individuals who have, given us plants or seeds, including my mom even sent me seeds from, the West Coast that are the same type of thing we would grow here, so it's not going to be an invasive species. Things from her garden, so it's just really cool. We're making, like I said, we're making history, a new garden out of historic gardens.
Right. And of course, any organization like yours re relies heavily on volunteers and volunteer work. So this is a great chance for people to get their hands dirty and share something that they actually love with the wider community, isn't it?
It is, and volunteers. So the plants haven't just come from volunteers, but we have had volunteers here literally getting their hands dirty, helping us to not just doing the planting and the fun work, but a lot of the hard work that took over a year to even get to the new planting stage. We had a lot of issues with drainage and compacted soil and, pulling up things like black walnut trees that had started to come up on the property. And there was a lot of cleanup and prep work we needed to do. And we've had some work parties. We've had volunteers from the Weiser Center at SUNY Potsdam, students who've come a few times to just kind of do hard work like pulling up old landscape cloth and moving mulch and, the kind of stuff that we just don't have the, bodies on staff or the capacity to do ourselves. So it's been really amazing, having this support from the community to do the physical work as well. But we certainly are always looking for more people who like getting their hands dirty and don't mind doing this kind of work.
Well, of course, as any gardener can tell you, a garden is an ongoing project and it always needs care, as you just said, maintenance and expansion. So tell us about your garden sponsorship program and what your plans for the garden are going forward.
Yes, so as you mentioned, I'm also a gardener myself, and I know that whatever my plans are and whatever time frame I think something's going to happen in, the reality often ends up being quite different. And as we know, this year the county is in the historic drought, and I've heard from a lot of gardeners that like we were hoping to do another garden tour, which is one of the programs we've been doing as a fundraiser for this project. And unfortunately, by this fall, a lot of people's gardens just weren't in great shape because of the lack of rain. That, doing another garden tour this fall has not been realistic. But we have been trying to do programs, new programs, which we will be continuing to do, introducing new programs to, all of the money we raise from those will go back into this project. We do have an ongoing garden sponsorship program where we have, multiple levels that people can donate, anything from, money to allow us to buy small tools and plants to things like interpretive panels, because this will be an ongoing project for a number of years. And of course, the maintenance will be forever. But it's not just about establishing the garden. It'll take us another few years to get the gardens beds themselves established the way we would like. But then there is interpretation. We've already put some little signs to label the plants, but we have a lot of future signage we want to do to,
Mhm.
put this in perspective, give people more information. We're going to have seating, more pathways potentially established. There's more we want to do to really make it a great educational space and hopefully have school groups and tours come in. So there's a lot of different ways people could support, either with time or materials or obviously money to allow us to get those things.
Well, so I'll be sure to put that information and those links in our show notes so anybody who is interested can help you folks out. So we're at the end of the summer season. It's the beginning of fall and winter. What does the St. Lawrence County History Center have planned for the coming seasons in terms of uh, programs and things that people can be involved in?
Yes, so as far as the garden goes, we are wrapping up. There's all the usual work to do of putting things to bed for the season that we will be doing. But in the short term, we have identified the next phase of our project is actually to level out the front yard. There's a lot of spaces that are bumpy and uneven, and it's not very accessible as we try to expand to have people walking. We don't want anybody tripping, and we want them to be able to feel like they can walk around the whole yard easily. So we're going to have the yard sort of leveled out this fall, and then we are going to plant those serviceberry trees I mentioned in some new small garden beds we're establishing in the front yard. That's kind of our big project to finish out the year. And then next spring it'll be the first time we'll really see the results of some of the things we planted this year. And we're hoping, those things continue to fill in, and we'll probably be doing some new plantings. Um, we are going to be doing a workshop that is sort of related to the garden. So if people are interested, sorry, I'm just grabbing my calendar here. We do actually have a workshop coming up on cyanotype scarf making. It's going to be on November 8th. We have a special presenter who's coming from the Sackett's Harbor area, and she is going to teach people scarves actually dyed with indigo, which was a historic material that was used to make the first blue jeans. Lots of things that are blue that artists still use. We have a plant called false indigo, also known as baptisia, that we did plant in the yard, which was the more commonly used variety here because it's more adapted to the climate. So if people would like to do a holiday workshop, thinking about some of those historic dye plants, this workshop, they will be taking some indigo dyed scarves, and they will actually get to use some sun reactive materials to do impressions of plants and things on the scarves. And so it should be a really neat fall workshop that's coming up. And we're hoping to add more workshops that relate to historic plants, tinctures, salves, all those kinds of things as well.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I want to ask you a question. One of the things that we talk a lot about in uh, the need for are to take care of our pollinators. Do you have any pollinator plants in your garden? Is that going to be a feature of what you're doing?
We do, and I'm so glad you asked that because we've been focusing so much on history that that environmental piece is actually something we've been thinking about a lot as well, and are considering. Um, and our front yard, which was not, well, front, it's actually the back, but it's the main entrance to our museum near our parking lot, was not something we had considered in the initial garden plan. But one of our volunteers brought us a bunch of plants that we weren't even expecting this summer. And she and our building and grounds person just made the decision to take away some weird grass patches that were hard to mow near our back door and just to turn them into a pollinator garden. So it's small at the moment, but we do have a lot of pollinator friendly plants, many of which are native. Many are perennials. There are some annuals that won't come back next year, but we established that this summer in the back of the building, and it's actually been very popular to the pollinators. We saw tons of butterflies, bees, wasps, all kinds of things there. So we're thinking about pollinator plants in the rest of the grounds as well. But that is something we have already done. So that's been exciting to see. We even had a hummingbird come and visit.
Well, you're really role modeling how we should all be thinking about our properties in terms of making them not only attractive, but also making them useful to pollinators and other kinds of useful insects. So, Carlene, tell us how people can support the work and the mission of the museum. You can join as a member, you can become a sponsor, or make donations. How does all that work?
Yes. So, my one of my staff, Megan Royce, she's our engagement and advancement coordinator, has been doing an amazing job kind of helping me keep up with all of this and coming up with new creative ways that people can support and partner with us. So she is the go-to person to contact if you would like to give really in any way. If you're interested in volunteering, you can get in touch with me. I coordinate most of our volunteers. If you're interested in being a sponsor or giving us money, Megan is the person to contact. And we do have more information about all of that on our website. We also send out newsletters pretty regularly. If you'd like to join our email list and stay up to date on everything we're doing. And we can certainly give you more detailed information if you get in touch with us about how you can be involved. And we're open to new creative ideas we haven't thought of yet as well.
Well, that's great. So, it is really this property and this and your organization is for the county, and you are always looking for ways to bring people in and to implement ideas, and that's exactly what you should be doing. So thank you again for coming in. This is the second time you've been a guest on the show, and I am sure that there will be opportunities for us to have you back as you go ahead and develop programs and expand your outreach.
Yes, thank you so much. It is a pleasure. And I do look forward to coming back in the future as well.
All right, very good. Well, thanks again, Carlene, for coming in. And a reminder to our viewers that these conversations are a production of North Country Matters. This show is a civic collaboration between the League of Women Voters of St. Lawrence County and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country matters.